Hi everyone, Jeff Alex here, your host of the Living Well with MS podcast. To all our listeners, I hope you and your families are staying safe and healthy during this COVID-19 crisis. While social distancing and other restrictions may seem like a drag, in the long run they will prove critical to stemming the tide of this epidemic and returning to a sense of normality. I have faith we'll come out of this stronger, smarter and a bit more enlightened as a result. In the meantime, we at Overcoming MS and the whole team behind this podcast are here for you to keep you informed and help you keep on track with your personal journey to a healthier you. Now, on with the show. Today's episode is a personal and professional perspective on OMS. For this episode, I'd like to welcome Caroline Clarke, the Chief Executive of the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust. Caroline has been the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust's Chief Finance Officer since 2011, and in 2012 she was named Finance Director of the Year by the Healthcare Financial Management Association. She was appointed the Trust's Deputy Chief Executive in 2012 and Chief Executive in 2019. Caroline is a trustee of Overcoming MS. So, welcome Caroline to the podcast, and I'd like to start out by asking you why, as someone who's heavily involved in the NHS, you chose to follow MS, and really just about your MS journey.
Okay, so I was diagnosed with something called transverse myelitis in, I think probably 1997, when I was working at a hospital in the East End. And I can remember I fell off my motorbike, and I remember thinking, something's wrong with my leg, and I went to A&E, and of course it was my mates who were the doctors, and they said, we probably need to just run a few tests on you, and nobody was really explicit about what was going on. And it was kind of when I was given an MRI and they wanted to look at my head when I thought I'd slipped a disc in my back, that I realised something was a bit strange. And then they sent me to see a neurologist, and the neurologist explained that I had one lesion, and if it was only one, it was called transverse myelitis. And then I sort of read loads about it. And you know that thing when you read, you read what you want to see. So I sort of read that there was a kind of conversion rate into MS, but that it was tiny, tiny, tiny. And I think I probably transposed the numbers. It's unfortunate because I'm an accountant. So anyway, so that was 2007, and I was quite poorly, and I kind of lost. I couldn't walk for a while, and it took me about a year to recover properly, but I got better, and I carried on working. And then I think in about 2015, I remember the same creeping. People call it the MS hug, don't they? That thing you get around your stomach, and that happened. And I remember it was a Wednesday morning, and I was working in my current organisation, the Royal Free in North London. And I just thought, oh God, I know what that feeling is. And I suddenly thought, I think I've got a horrible feeling. I think this might be MS. So I hadn't thought about it. I'd had kind of, 6 or 7 pretty good years. And I just always thought I had this weird neurological thing, and it was called weird neurological thing. And then I went into work. I saw my medical director. He referred me to a neurologist. And really, really quickly, unlike lots of people, I had a diagnosis, and I had a bunch of lesions on my sort of neck quite high up, and it really, really knocked my arms and hands out, and I had the stuff, so it was all upper body, and so I was able to walk, and then quite quickly one of my colleagues said, you need to go and see Gavin Giannoni, who is Giovanoni, I can never say his surname, who's at Barts. So quite quickly I got kind of medicated. But at the same time, one of my colleagues, and I was quite open at work, I just thought I've got to make a decision about whether I'm going to tell people or not. And it was a bit like coming out. So I'm gay, I came out. Well, every day I have to come out to people because you sort of have to do the explanation about where your husband isn't and all that stuff. And so I sort of took a decision. It's a bit like that. So I kind of just, I'm going to come out to everybody. And one of my colleagues gave me the OMS book, and just said, you need to read this. And she's a woman that has an underlying health condition herself, but knows Linda Bloom brilliantly. And so this connection happened. And I read it, and like most people, I'd done the thing, I'd trawled the internet. I'd gone through a period of eating organ meat. You know, what's that diet? Is it the Wales diet? I've
Yes,
sort of done a bit of that,
that,
and it's like, this feels really peculiar and not quite right. Although there's some of the science, you know, I quite, you know, I work in the health service and I'm quite interested in science, so I sort of quite like that. But then I read George's stuff, and it blew me away, and I was like, well, this just makes perfect sense. And it made perfect sense, partly because I kind of, you know, my partner's an acupuncturist. I live as a relatively healthy diet. I'm 51 years old, so I'm kind of in middle age, and you sort of have there's the middle-aged wake-up call, isn't there? And then the science behind it, and the science behind the diet, and the fact that there are these different facets of the OMS program really appealed to me. I'm not the most disciplined person in the world, so you know, I that's the thing I probably struggle with the most, is the sort of compliance aspect. But no one's telling you to do it. You're doing it for you. That's the point. So I started doing that, and then I was really lucky to be introduced to Linda and Tony and the sort of OMS gang, and just thought they were the most amazing people. I'm conscious that they'll now think I'm flattering them, and I'm not. They're amazing. You know, I think what they've done is brilliant. I think Linda's journey is inspirational, and something about that really got me. But I was, you know, I'd made a decision to follow it because I felt like it would make me stay strong and well, and thus far it has.
And what do colleagues in the NHS think about it? Do they think, oh, this is like complete alternative, sort of new world stuff, or is it sort of generally respected, and you think, oh, actually you're doing, you know, the best you can?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? The NHS is made up of really different people, and doctors are, there's a broad church of people who are doctors, and most doctors, all doctors want you to follow a healthy lifestyle, right? So there are aspects of the OMS program which are just so uncontentious, and you know, who you know, I don't see how anybody can really, you know, I suppose what am I trying to say? I don't really see how anybody can say anything negative about OMS, because I just think it's so good and so sensible. But where people are hold back a bit more, or a bit more reticent, is I think they just don't see that there's more science that's needed. And I suppose what I'd urge the MS community and the scientific MS community to do more is to do some more research on it, do some more research on the different facets, do some more research on the diet, because that would really help. And I think, but I think, you know, generally, so most of my colleagues just, this is what I do. It's not you know, and I don't always get it right, but I'm, you know, they know that I practice mindfulness. I'm very open about that. And in fact, it's opened up some brilliant opportunities for me. So during the COVID crisis, which we're in now, we've put together a very big health and wellbeing program for our staff, because they're having to do things in their daily lives that they don't normally do. It's much, much more stressful, and they're working really hard. So we put in a bunch of psychological support programs and mindfulness programs and yoga and all this stuff, and being able to talk about it from a position of knowledge and practice actually really helps. So I think there is, you know, it's opened up loads of avenues for me, and I'm really glad that I'm doing it. And
so you've also got a very high pressure and high profile job. Now, a lot of people with MS end up taking early retirement. Physically, they might not be able to, and mentally sometimes. So most people will find that stressful situations probably exacerbate their symptoms. So how does having a high profile job, a high pressure job, affect your MS, and how do you deal with that? And is there any tips for people to deal with pressures at work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So so I suppose the first thing I should say is that my symptoms at the moment, touch wood, are relatively gentle. So I can't write. My hands are really affected, and my kind of arms and it's in my upper body. But I can walk and run to a certain extent not much but a bit, and so I feel pretty physically able. So therefore, you're constantly having to come out to people. It's that kind of hidden thing, isn't it? Which lots of people will experience all the time. My symptoms get worse with stress for sure, and my team all notice. So I have a thing when I fiddle with my hands because I can't feel them and I want to make sure they're still there. And my team know that, and it's like one of those signals. And they kind of, if there's a big conversation and Caroline's fiddling with her hands, so I'm trying to learn to sit on my hands. And of course, during the COVID pandemic, there's all this stuff about touching your face, so I'm really trying not to be so moving around with my hands. So I'm not a particularly high stress individual. That's the first thing to say as well. Like I have always been sort of I found it relatively easy to pull myself back from a situation, take a deep breath. And now, having practiced mindfulness for a number of years, that's helped. And I'm quite disciplined about taking holidays and having weekends and having time out. That's really important. I have a 10-year-old daughter who makes it all worthwhile, and that stuff. And I have a lovely partner who's really supportive. And so, all those things make it easier to take time out. And as soon as you walk in the door, you have to stop worrying about work. I have to say I've been rubbish at that recently. The last few weeks, I think it's kind of, I would say that I'm not living my usual life, but I will get back to it. So I think that, managing stress in MS is probably the most important thing that I can do. And the way I got into mindfulness was really helpful. Actually, some people kind of getting through apps or whatever. I did an 8-week course, and that was probably the single biggest intervention I've made over the last 10 years. It's really made a difference because it means that I have a practice, and that it's not, I don't spend an hour every morning doing it. I practice throughout the day at different periods, and it just really helps. And, in a kind of really stressful meeting where I don't know, we're discussing oxygen levels in the hospital and we haven't got enough oxygen. Actually breathing and taking a step back and observing what's going on is really, really helpful technique. So out of everything I've done, actually, along with the diet and exercise, mindfulness is really, really helpful practice.
So actually, if you're feeling at all stressed, you do a sort of like micro session, yeah. Yeah, I do. In fact, sometimes I just go to the toilet and do it. I just, just there's something about just getting away. I've even, so little things in life. So someone bought me a Apple Watch for my 50th, and that's got a little breathe thing. It tells you to breathe, and even that's quite helpful. It's like you can't. I think the thing you learn when you practice mindfulness is to be kind to yourself and give yourself a break. You need some discipline and some practice. And you've got to keep doing it. It's like anything, isn't it? 10,000 hours of practice makes you better. But you can do it at weird times of the day and all that stuff. And the other thing that really helps, of course, is sleep. So I have really noticed my sleep patterns ebb and flow. So they really changed after I had Lemtrada. So that I don't know what happened there, but they kind of just did for them slightly. And then they came back. And then recently I've been a bit agitated in sleep, which I think is I think that's a decent response to the COVID pandemic. Kind of, if I'm not anxious, then what am I, but I am so much better when I sleep. So really sleeping properly, not eating big meals at night, not drinking too much at night, all that stuff. Really sensible advice. Things we learn in middle age, and all that stuff, annoyingly true. Yeah, there was something Craig Hassard said, who does a lot of the mindfulness stuff for OMS. He said about that it's good to have do a mindfulness session every day is great, but actually to throw in sort of mini mindfulness sessions as well, and just say you can do a minute here, and just to sort of reset yourself is a useful technique. And if you're just wandering somewhere, then you can do that mindfully. You can make a cup of coffee mindfully.
Yeah, totally.
All those things count.
Yeah, live your life mindfully. I think that's absolutely right. I would say I probably have 10 at least such mindful incidents in a day. But I mean, it just is how I am now. And the escaping to the loo thing doesn't happen quite so often. But I do, I do take time out, and I do kind of go for little strolls around. So I work across 3 hospital sites in North London, and there's, it's perfectly easy to walk out of a hospital and walk around it, or in Hampstead to walk onto Hampstead Heath, or, find some space where there aren't other people and just breathe. That's a thing everybody can do. They can get out, I think. Well, actually, that's not true. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? In these COVID times, you realise not everybody has a balcony or an outside space. Not everybody has a garden. So some people do have to work harder than that.
Yeah, no, I've realised we moved 16 years ago from central London to North Devon, which, and this goes out around the world, so that's a very rural area. So go from very, very very, very built up area, and we had a shared front door, so I had no outside space, shared front door, so it is very different. And now I have a garden, and I can actually stay in on my property and do some exercise, and it is difficult, isn't it? I think different for different people. But so is there people? So we'll come back to COVID-19 in a minute, but I realise you're not a medical doctor, but do you have any advice for people with MS? Because obviously you are very, very connected with the health service, and obviously your neurologist is Gavin Giovannoni, who's top specialist. So you do have a lot of exposure to this information, and know Linda and Tony Bloom as well. So do you have any advice for people who have MS in general terms to start with?
Generally, well, I mean, I suppose you can only talk about the things that have helped you and the stuff you've read. And I think rereading George's book actually helps me. I've probably read it about 4 or 5 times now. So there's something for me around this, because there's nuggets in there, aren't there? And so that's always, if you can be bothered to read a book, but or just having a look at the website for you got to I'm not a particularly disciplined person, so I'm constantly needing kind of sources of kind of re-inspiration and things. So if we're thinking about diet, I'm always after kind of new things to cook and make and all that stuff. And I hate oily fish, right? It's really disappointing, but I hate sardines. So that's where do you get your protein from and all that. I tell you what, in the last few weeks I've eaten more lentils than you can shake a stick at. I kind of just but so there's something for me around sort of re-inspiring oneself. I think there's a real thing at the moment about, I know it's been really sunny, but if people are in lockdown, they haven't been out, there's a real thing about vitamin D, isn't there? So making sure you keep all that up, and keeping exercising if in lockdown. That's quite hard. I've personally found it really difficult to exercise recently because I've been so time pressured that even kind of I cycle everywhere, and that's kind of how I get my base exercise. But I've sort of been promising myself to return to normal exercise. I have to say I think I've had COVID-19. I had it quite early on, and I was quite poorly for a couple of weeks, and I haven't been for a run since because I haven't wanted to test my lungs, and it's a nasty illness, so I kind of, but I think you need to the exercise. We know that our muscles waste if we don't exercise, right? So, people who are, listening to this who are in completely different situation to me will know that more than I do. But there's something about where you can take your moments to exercise in any way you can, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal basis, I found, because I used to do lots of exercise. So I ran a marathon. That's probably getting on 10 years ago now.
I read that about you. Yeah.
Rock climb, surf, mountain bike, snowboard, everything. Yeah. And I never really doing a marathon I had to train for. But the other things I didn't really train specifically. I just went out and did stuff and was always fit and active. And now if I don't do anything for a few weeks, my fitness levels drastically drop really quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that, I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that sort of an MS specific thing that you think is...
That's general. It's general, Jeff. I think it's all, you know, if we don't... And so we see this in hospitals, right? So if people say that kind of if someone comes into a hospital bed, you just want to get them up and about as quickly as possible. In fact, the worst thing you can do if you're ill is just lie down in some senses. So obviously not for all illnesses, but you know, particularly older people and frailer people, once you start lying down, you lose muscle mass and it's much, much harder to get up. So I think that's for all of us. And it's going to be particularly for people who've got less ability and have more impact of MS. So
it does seem that actually a lot of the things that we're doing in OMS are becoming more mainstream anyway, not for people with MS. They're now saying, so exercise, yes. Eat healthily, yes. They're now saying in the UK, they've just recently said you need to all take vitamin D.
Yeah.
Because that might help you with COVID-19. And well, they were saying generally about a year ago, they were saying everyone's probably deficient of vitamin D, and particularly COVID-19, we think that might help.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we're doing are starting to become mainstream, not even for people with MS. They're just saying everyone needs to do this stuff. So.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, science is maybe catching up.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And that's what I meant when I said before. I really hope the research MS community does more into particularly aspects of our programme that haven't been so researched. So more on diet and low-fat diet, I think, would be really, really helpful.
And so the other thing I wanted to ask about, so this recording is being done at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly in the UK. And if you're managing a healthcare trust, I just wanted to ask specifically, is there any advice for people with MS at this time with COVID-19?
Yeah, so caveat everything by saying that I'm an economist and an accountant, and I'm not medically qualified. So I can only talk about what I know and what I've read and what people have told me. So I think I've had the disease and I have antibodies to it because I've had a test. And although people tell me the tests aren't as accurate as they could be, but I'd like to think it's my immune system giving me some payback. So it's so good. It's it's attacking my myelin sheath and it's making antibodies. And it's nasty and it made my symptoms worse. So it made the neurological damage that I have and my ability to use my hands always gets worse when I have a cold or a fever. And it was exactly the same with COVID. So that's one thing. I had it relatively mildly and it was unpleasant. So that's another thing to say. And of course, my hospitals are treating hundreds, possibly thousands of people now who are very, very ill and quite quickly get into very severe breathing difficulties. That didn't happen to me. So the things that I know are, of course, if you're immunosuppressed, it's a really horrible thing to get. And we're seeing more patients in our hospitals who have a compromised immune system. So for us, that will be lots of people on medication, I guess, where the medication works in a way that suppresses your immune system. I've had Lemtrada, and I know that I would not have. I didn't want to go near anybody with a cold after taking Lemtrada, alemtuzumab in other countries, so same rules apply. As you just said, Jeff, we're all being encouraged to take vitamin D, and I don't know the science behind that, but I do understand the science behind not the sunlight vitamin D connection. So if people are in lockdown and not outside as much, then it seems quite obvious to me that they should take vitamin D. And I've upped my dose. And in fact, here in London, we've had having our first rainy day for about 3 weeks. It's quite weird. So lots more reasons to stay inside. I think the same issues around making sure you take exercise and making sure you keep fit and healthy. I mean, it's kind of, it's the same rules. The difficulty with COVID-19 is we don't really understand the disease. It seems to progress in a way that we're not familiar with, and can attack people go into multi-organ failure more quickly and in an unexpected way. So because it's quite a new disease, my medical colleagues are still trying to work out the best way of treating people. There are loads of clinical trials going on. In the UK now, we've got a vaccine trial that's just started, trials in humans. So, one would hope within a year to 18 months there will be a vaccine, but that's a year to 18 months away, and that's an optimistic view. One would hope that the clinical trials for actually treating the disease will result in a treatment relatively quickly. But again, clinical trials can take a long time because the results need to come through, and you need enough patients to have tested them in, tested new drugs in to be sure that they're going to do the right thing. And of course, testing people. In the UK, we've been quite slow to test people, whereas in other countries, actually, testing out in the community is prevalent, and we see that making a real difference to keeping the COVID numbers down. So I think for our MS community and the OMS community, I say stick to the programme. Right? Stick to the programme. If your immune system is compromised, just take extra care. In the UK, in the next 2 weeks, we think the government we know the government's thinking about the policy of physical or social distancing, and we know that there'll be some more guidance coming out. And I think for our community, we just need to be super careful, take extra care. And there'll be people listening to this who are probably on the list of what they call shielded people in the UK, where people are having to take special care. I'm on that list.
Are you? My letter recently, yeah. Okay. I got my letter just last week, and but we'd already decided to essentially shield anyway. So I do live in a rural area, so I do walk my dog, but I don't see anyone when I walk my dog. Just go directly to fields, and literally I don't have physical contact with anyone at all. Does that and it does seem to be inconsistent. I mean, I got my letter somewhat unexpectedly because my MS nurse didn't think I would, and I've had Lemtrada as well, and I thought it might be because of that, but it just says the reason on it is because I have multiple sclerosis. So some people are getting the letters to say, and I mean, this in the UK, some people would be familiar in the UK with the shielding term, but essentially what they're saying is people who are sent these letters should stay in their own property, and to the extent that they will actually even send you food deliveries, and you should stay in your own property for 12 weeks. So do you think, does it make sense for people with MS to try to do, whether they've had a letter or not, to say that they should? Does it make sense to isolate themselves as much as they practically can?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's really difficult. Because I think the shielding guidance has been really inconsistent, and it's followed different local authorities are doing it differently. The advice that I've had personally from clinicians has been, I'm okay. And I've asked a neurologist, an immunologist, and I asked about 4 different people because I was concerned. Remember, I took Lemtrada, the last dose was 4 years ago, and my immune system, and I get tested. You probably have the same thing, Jeff. You have kind of get monthly blood and urine tests to check everything's okay. So I'm pretty confident about my immune system, and I feel okay, and I'm not taking any undue risks with my in my job. So I'm trying to provide visible leadership to my teams over the phone and over the iPad, and then I do go and visit the hospitals and see people, but I'm appropriately 2 meters away, and where it's appropriate I'll wear a mask if I'm in a patient area. So I can't. The shielding thing's really difficult, isn't it? I don't really. I think if someone had sent me that letter, I would feel quite uncomfortable. But I'm at a different cycle to my treatment to you, and I've had some different clinical advice. And this is the nature of all these illnesses, isn't it? We don't know 100% what's going on. But if you feel your immune system is compromised in any way, then then I guess you follow the advice. And if I was living,
so maybe sort of be careful, but not be overly concerned.
Well, I think if you're in my position where I know I'm not immunocompromised, I know my immune system's okay, then I think I'm just like everybody else. So I think when I think I've had COVID, and my partner's had COVID, I think I was slightly more affected than she was, or stroke, she was braver than I was. But I'm okay, so it's very difficult to give advice in these situations, isn't it? It's a new disease, so it's really difficult. And when you have new diseases, people are super cautious. I think I would feel very differently if this was 2017 and I was like kind of months after my second lot of Lemtrada and possibly thinking I might have to have a third, then I'd be thinking really differently to how I do now. It's that thing.
So best to speak to your neurologist about that, because I know
always
they
the
are
best
sort of
advice.
delaying some treatment.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? I wonder if people listening to this, there may be people listening thinking, I've had my treatment delayed because of the pandemic. I don't know of anybody. I think in my organisation, if you were due some treatment, you would still have it. But I don't know that. And of course, if you one of the things we're thinking about in the English NHS is how you restart services in a way that protects people that haven't got COVID and how you test them and stuff. So it is likely that if you're waiting for treatment, you're going to have a COVID test to make sure that you haven't got it. And there's a whole bunch of things that we probably haven't done in the past that we will do in the future as a response to the disease, and that will impact people waiting for treatment or in treatment. And I also expect that we'll be doing it slightly differently around the country because it's also new and it's things aren't so heavily protocolized yet. But I think they will.
Gavin Giovannoni did actually say that the year between Lemtrada treatments, or if you're having ocrelizumab, then you have these sort of treatment sort of schedules. They're not set in stone. That you don't have to worry too much, and delaying it by several months, 6 months even, is not an issue really. It's it's almost fits easily just to say, oh, it's yearly. That's sort of really, that's kind of random to how the Earth spins around the sun. It's not actually medically like a thing. So he was very much saying, don't worry about it. And actually, personally, so my second round of Lemtrada, completely not in a serious way, we were going on holiday to Thailand, so they said, oh yeah, just delay it, we'll just delay it 2 months. I didn't go because it was a family holiday, and they said it's fine, absolutely fine. So I don't think people need to be from the advice from Gavin Giovannoni, certainly don't be overly concerned by delaying around a treatment, because it's fairly random in almost that it's exactly a year. It doesn't have to be exactly a year.
I think I had 16 months between my two treatments for exactly that reason, that summer got in the way. So although, as I was saying to you, I was listening, I remember my second treatment, and it must have been in June, because I was waiting for the European Union referendum results, and so stuck at home post Lemtrada, forced to listen to the radio. Strange days indeed. Although that seems like a terribly long time ago, doesn't it?
Yes. Right. Well, thank you very much for a very informative chat, and just really, insight to. As much as anything, having a very high pressure, high profile job, and managing really well with OMS. I'd just like to thank you very much for being our guest on this podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, OMS, for making a real difference to my life.
With that, I would like to thank you all for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Remember that there is a wealth of information at overcomingms.org, including show notes and an archive of all Living Well with MS episodes. Once again, that's overcomingms.org. There you can also find OMS-friendly recipes and exercise tips, connect with other OMSers in your local area through our OMS Circles programme, and learn about the latest research going on in the MS world generally and related to OMS specifically. I encourage you to register on the site and stay informed about the latest news and updates. I also encourage you to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode, and please feel free to share it with others who might find it of value. Let us know what you think about the podcast by leaving a review, and if you have ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you, so please contact us via our website overcomingms.org. Thanks again for listening and for joining me on this journey to overcoming MS and living well with multiple sclerosis. I'm Jeff Alex, and I'll see you next time.